welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Sue William Silverman is an award-winning memoirist, essayist, and poet of 8 books, including Lovesick, One Woman's Journey Through Sexual Addiction, which was made into a Lifetime TV movie, and How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences. Her latest book, Acetylene Torch Songs, Writing True Stories to Ignite the Soul, is a hybrid craft book and essay collection for memoirists and essayists seeking mentor-based instruction and inspiration. Sue teaches in the MFA in Writing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Sue William Silverman, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I am so excited to talk with you about your incredible new book, Acetylene Torch Songs, Writing True Stories to Ignite the Soul. Linda Joy Myers, founder of the National Association of Memoir Writers, says Acetylene Torch Songs will burn its way through everything you thought you knew about craft and seduce you into a spell of curiosity and revelation. This is one of the best books on writing truth as art I've ever read. And author William Giraldi says Acetylene Torch Songs is precisely what you'd expect from the wondrous Sue William Silverman. This is no mere manual, but an essential lodestar for artists of nonfiction, a book with a vision that will be a game changer for writers who wish to do as Silverman herself does so well, to daringly reveal the ecstasies and darknesses that dwell at the hub of us. And I could go on and on, Sue. There are many more, but I want plenty of time to talk to you. So let's dive in. What made you decide to write this new book, Acetylene Torch Songs?
First, I just want to thank you for having me on your podcast. So thank you very much. I'm really honored. And thank you for that lovely introduction. So so my new book is Acetylene Torch Songs, Writing True Stories to Ignite the Soul. And I think I wrote it for probably 2 main reasons. One is that I really deeply believe in the craft of creative nonfiction and the importance of personal narrative. I think we all have a story to tell, and actually more than one story to tell. And the voices are important. And in many ways, I think creative nonfiction can be sort of a genre for voices that aren't heard all the time, women, BIPOC writers, LGBTQ plus writers. I mean, just that it's a genre that's very inclusive. And so I think that that's really important. And just by sort of putting out a craft book, I was hoping that, that might give people more courage to write their own stories and to sort of know they're not alone in all of that. At the same time, sort of ironically, it can be a very misunderstood genre in that, memoirists are accused of sort of navel gazing and that this is as much of an art form as, say, poetry or fiction. And I take big exception to that. And it makes me actually quite angry. And so part of the book, in part 2, I do take on sort of the naysayers. And throughout the book, I really show how this absolutely is an art form, every bit as important as poetry and fiction. So I think those 2 reasons sort of prompted me into writing this book.
You said you believe there's a misunderstanding about creative nonfiction, and and what it is. How how do you define it? How do you define creative nonfiction?
It's really okay. So creative nonfiction is not just telling the story of your life or even a segment like this happened to me. That's not what it is. But what it is really it's a journey of self-exploration. It's discovering the story behind the story. It's discovering the metaphors that make, say, my life uh, interesting in a way that just, if I was sitting around with a friend, say, hey, this happened to me, my best friend might care about that, but that's not art, like, or an anecdote about your life is not art. So, but finding the metaphor of an experience is what sort of elevates your story into art. And it also is what makes it universal because, yes, there are some memoirs that maybe are would not be considered art. I mean, they're bad novels, there's bad poetry, there's bad creative nonfiction, obviously. But and if a memoir is not elevated to art, then it is really just saying, hey, this thing happened to me and you should be interested in it. And that's not enough. You really have to write that metaphor slant in order to make your story universal, so that something that happens to me, even if like you don't experience the same thing, you would still relate to it on an emotional level. So if you can relate to my story on that sort of metaphoric and emotional level, then I think I've written a piece of art.
And I want to come back to that metaphor and a little more on the art in a little bit, but I would also like to know now, where does where does the name of the book come from? Can you explain the name?
Yes, I can, and it's so Acetylene Torch Songs. That actually was a title that I wanted to give my second memoir, which is about sex addiction. So my second memoir is called Lovesick: One Woman's Journey Through Sexual Addiction. I actually wanted to name it Acetylene Torch Song. My publisher said, no, sorry, that's not going to work. We aren't going to do that. So I've had this title in my head for like, oh God, since about the year 2000 or something. And I wanted to write a book. This is like a long answer. It should be simple.
I love a long answer.
So, but nothing I wrote since Lovesick was going to work for this. But Acetylene Torch Song sort of does, because yeah, the idea of acetylene torch. What is an acetylene torch? It's this fiery thing. And even if our stories are quiet, we have to find sort of what ignites them, what makes them sort of vivid on the page. And then torch song is it's a form of singing back maybe in the 20s, 30s, or 40s, like maybe Frank Sinatra and some of the crooners would sing torch songs, although mainly it was sung by women, like my love has left me. So it's sort of a little bit melodramatic, but a cool word, torch song. And in this instance, to sort of twine it with the idea of acetylene, it's like we're telling our torch songs, the things that happen to us. And again, it doesn't mean your story has to be headline worthy or something just sort of over the top. I mean, so some of my stories are, I mean, I'm an incest survivor. I struggle with sex addiction. Some of that is sort of fiery and dark, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, it can be whatever it is your story is. And it can be growing up on a farm and sort of what you learn from that. Whatever your story is, it still has to have that kind of ignition, that sort of kind of a burning sense of, I've got to write this, like I just feel like I'm just so I really just have to explore this in some form of depth. So sort of that burning desire to write it. So that's sort of where it comes from. I hope that answer was at all
I
clear.
love it. Yes, it is. It was great. And the book is filled with craft advice, wonderful craft advice, but it also contains new essays of yours. What made you decide to structure it this way?
So it's funny, like when you write, when you start out, you really don't know where you're going. And it did not start out that way. It really did start out just with sort of the craft chapters and, how to write about metaphor, voice, structure, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And so I sort of finished a complete draft of that. And then I thought, I'm offering all this advice. Do I really know how to follow my own advice? And yeah, sort of, I do because I've written a few books, but at the same time, I really wanted more of a challenge for myself. And because, when we write, it has to be really, I needed my own acetylene torch song. And I felt that the book needed another level, another layer of depth to it.
Mm.
And so thinking, okay, what I could do would be to write a personal essay that would speak to the concerns of that chapter.
Mhm.
So it was a, sort of experiment for me, but also a challenge for me. And I really embraced that. I really wanted to see kind of what would come out if I tried that. So I did, and I think it worked. And I really do like the idea of kind of writing a personal essay that really is geared to the concerns of that chapter, because it's a matter of, I'm sort of telling readers what to do, but by writing those personal essays, I'm also sort of showing,
Yeah.
okay, but this is sort of how you do it. So that came sort of late in my writing of the book, and a later revision, but I really did enjoy having that challenge for myself.
And it turned out really great. You say that the book illustrates the intersection of creativity and craft and courage. Can you speak to that a little bit? How is that?
Yeah, because to write creative nonfiction well, I think to be an artist takes courage, whatever, if you're, doing painting or a sculpture, writing a poem, short story, it all takes courage to sort of put your artistic self out there.
Mhm.
But I might claim that it takes a little bit more courage to really show your own inner life on a page and let people read about that one can feel, gosh, I mean, like
Yeah.
writing, I mentioned Lovesick, my second book. It took a lot of courage for me to sort of write about struggling with sex addiction for years. I mean, at one point I thought, I'll never write about that. I'm not going to
Mhm.
tell my best friend about that. So it did take a lot of courage. So but then you have to have craft to actually tell that story. I mean, you have to know your craft. How do you do it? Um, so there is that intersection with craft, but then on top of that is called creative nonfiction. It's not just nonfiction. So I'm not writing something that's just fact-based or something that's going to be like a PhD dissertation on, on say sex addiction or something. So I
Mhm.
really have to add that creative element, which would include, things like metaphor. So that's how those three elements kind of come together in order to have a very fully realized either essay or memoir.
You've said when you're turning your life into art, you're telling a universal story. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. And that is really where metaphor comes in.
Mm.
Because if I just said, oh, well, I struggled with sex addiction and it was hard and I was acting out with these dangerous men and on, you would say, oh, Sue, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And so that's sort of it. I
Mhm.
mean, that's what, like, sort of what you tell your therapist, right?
Mhm.
Um, and, and I would say, like, I felt really sad and alone. So if I'm just talking in those generalities and using abstract language, like I felt a sense of loss or I felt a sense of alienation, you understand what those words mean, but you don't feel them.
Mhm.
You can't feel an abstraction, right?
Mhm.
So in order for you to feel what I'm feeling, I have to take sensory imagery, sensory details, and craft them metaphorically so that an abstract word, say like loss, I would show it through a metaphor. And once I've shown it through a metaphor, then I can sort of bring the reader inside my experience. And then that's when it becomes universal. So in other words, like you wouldn't necessarily have experienced sex addiction, but if I show sex addiction metaphorically, or the idea of, say, alienation, loss, stuff like that, if I show that metaphorically, you would be able to relate to those underlying emotions. Like at some point in our lives, we've all felt probably alienated, a sense of loss, loneliness, but only if I avoid writing those words in just that abstract way, but really conveying those abstractions metaphorically, then the personal story is universal because you can relate to those underlying emotions. Was that clear?
Yes, it is clear. And I was thinking about in the book, you have a really great example of sort of talking about this voice of experience and metaphor and the scarf.
Yes.
Yes. Can
Um,
you talk about that a little bit?
I can. And I happen to have it right here. So this famous maroon scarf,
Mhm.
it's a section from Lovesick.
It's from Left. Okay. I knew.
Yes.
Okay.
And what I'll do, it's a very short little passage. I'll quickly read it and then talk about how that sort of evolved into a metaphor.
Mhm.
So just to set it up, so this book is about recovering from sex addiction, but this little piece is from, I'm a college freshman. I'm having an affair with a man old enough to be my father. He happens to wear this maroon scarf. I want this scarf. After he drops me off at the dorm one night, I take this scarf and then it picks up here. So now I'm alone in my dorm room and I press the scarf against my nose and mouth. I take a deep breath. The scent is of him, leaves smoldering in autumn dusk. And I believe it is the scent I have always craved, one I will always want. I don't understand why the scent of the scarf seems more knowable, more definite, more tangible than the rest of him. Now, the first like 4 years slogging through this book, it took a long time to write. The scarf was just a scarf. It was just like, the man was wearing it. I took it. I had it.
Mhm.
That's sort of it. But every draft I went through, the scarf sort of was really like almost like a neon light. Sue, pay attention to this scarf. And so finally, I need to pay attention to this scarf. What is this scarf really telling me? So that's when the scarf became a metaphor for like I could never have the man, he was married. He was old enough to be my father. Clearly, I was like this, college freshman, a complete, mess.
Mhm.
This was not a relationship that was going to work out. So the relationship was doomed. I couldn't have the man. All I could have was his scarf. And but how to convey that? But if I just said, oh, well, I feel lonely and lost and the man doesn't love me, I have his scarf, period, which was sort of the way it was the first, 4 years of the book. You couldn't relate to any of that. I mean, it's just, it's very abstract. But when I put that the scent is of him, leaves smoldering in autumn dusk, and I believe it is a scent I've always craved, one I will always want. And I don't understand why the scent of the scarf seems more knowable, more definite, more tangible than the rest of him. Then I've taken this maroon scarf and I've deepened it. And I've made the scarf into a metaphor that represents like loss, loneliness, alienation, but also in another way, sort of comfort, because the maroon scarf can offer me comfort in the way the man can't.
Mhm.
And so by so taking the maroon scarf that was always there, but I like sort of slanted the details, like sort of Emily Dickinson says, tell it slant. So I slanted the details around the scarf. So to make a metaphor, we take a sensory detail that's in our environment, in our everyday life, wherever we are, in this instance is this maroon scarf. I take the maroon scarf, I convey it in such a way, I slant it in such a way, I portray it in such a way so that it becomes a metaphor for the sense of loss and alienation. And then hopefully the reader can identify with those feelings of loss and alienation so that I don't have to come out and say, hey, I felt lost and alienated. And again, you would say, well, I'm so sorry, Sue, that's too bad. But because probably readers, in some other situation, obviously, I mean, not everybody's going to have their own maroons. Well, not everybody's going to have a maroon scarf, but they're going to have their own form of a maroon scarf. There's going to be something in your life that will help you relate to this idea of loss and alienation. Was that clear? Sort of what? Yeah.
Yes, it was very clear. And I wanted to sort of dig in a little bit more to this kind of idea of showing and telling. And, in fiction, fiction writers are often encouraged show, don't tell. And you say that in creative nonfiction, it's show and tell. And I might say that
Yes.
fiction is probably the same too, really. But can you talk about that? How the show and tell of creative nonfiction?
Yeah. So it is a matter of, we do show, say, like I do show how the maroon scarf, is a metaphor for alienation, loneliness, stuff like that. But then there are also parts of the book where the telling is actually more the idea of reflecting back on an experience, so that when I write a memoir or personal essay, it's not a matter of remembering what happened. It's more a matter of taking what you remember and reflecting on it, which is to say, by reflecting, I try to make sense of it. And that's where the telling comes in, because, all this stuff happened to me, or to you, to whoever writes their story. This stuff happened. And if I'm just remembering it, then again, that to me isn't art. You're not, it's just saying, hey, this happened to me, then this next thing happened to me. So that's the sort of telling an anecdote of what happened to you. But to make it art, we do show how these sensory details can be metaphors, but then we also have an opportunity to reflect. And even in that short, those few sentences that I read, just briefly again, okay, I press the scarf against my nose and mouth, I take a deep breath. The scent is of him, leaves smoldering in autumn dusk. And I believe it is a scent I've always craved, one I will always want. So that's kind of setting up the metaphor for this scarf to be sort of a metaphor for loneliness and alienation, something that I really can't have. And then where I go into, I don't understand why the scent of the scarf seems more knowable, more definite, more tangible than the rest of him. To some extent, that is telling, that is reflecting. I'm sort of moving from the showing to the telling, so it's all one, and that's just like maybe 4 sentences or something. So it's a very fluid thing. It's not like I'm going to show for 50 pages, then I'm going to tell for 50 pages, or even it can be, you can go for pages that are just showing, and you can go for pages that are telling, but you can also, within a little paragraph, you can show and tell. But just think of the fact that you're not just remembering what happened, that you really do want to reflect upon it. What does that happening mean? So that's what the telling is reflecting, it's questioning, it's like mulling about something. It's sort of discovering like an irony of a situation. It's really moving more into the head part of writing as opposed to, say, the heart part of it. And really struggling to make sense, because why bother writing if it's not a journey of self-exploration? If I'm just going to sit and tell you what happened to me, I would be incredibly bored. So goodness knows the reader's going to be bored too. But I really write creative nonfiction to understand what that happening meant. What is the meaning of this? How did this affect my life? How do I make sense of it now? How do I even envision it now? So it's sort of that author me sitting in front of my computer writing who really comes up with the telling part. So like, it's not something I would ever have known back when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Not a clue back then. I just slogged through my life like anybody else, hoping to get through the day,
Yeah.
hoping for the best. But that's when the author part kicks in, that here I am, I'm sitting here, I'm writing my story. I want to make sense of it. So one way to make sense of it is to reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the telling.
What do you think makes a story a piece of art? Metaphor, we've talked about. Is it metaphor?
It's meta. Well, yes, metaphor I think is the biggest part, but it's also giving a shape, a structure to your work, so that it's not just sort of some random pieces of events just sort of slapped on a page. I mean, you have to form it the way you would form a poem or a short story or a novel. You have to have a structure that best contains the work. Like, what structure would best contain this book? And so, like Lovesick, it's structured around 28 days I spent in rehab with some flashbacks. So that structure works for the book because it's really the memoir is really more about recovering than it is about all the years I acted out. Those are shown in sort of some flashbacks. So you have to know why. Why was it so bad that I needed rehab? Well, here's why it was so bad. So I needed to have those flashbacks. But it's structured around 28 days I spent in rehab. And so everything you write does have to be artfully crafted into a structure so that it makes artistic sense. So you have metaphor, you have structure, you also have to find sort of the right voice to tell it. And that's part of what, would make it art as well. For example, my first memoir is about growing up in my incestuous families. Because I Remember Terror, Father, I Remember You. The voice of that book is mainly that of a young wounded girl. That makes sense. On the other hand, Lovesick, the voice of Lovesick is more that of sort of a tougher, edgier addict, right? And so those two voices are very different from each other. So say if I tried to cram all of that into one book, the voices would have been all out of whack and very discordant. So you have to find, we're also told a lot when we're studying writing, well, you have to find your voice. Well, see, I sort of don't, that's sort of true, but sort of not true. What is more true to me is that we have to find the voice of the piece at hand, so that the voice of this one book, Because I Remember Terror, Father, I Remember You, the voice of that book is not going to work for Lovesick. It's two different narrators, two different kinds of energy, two different situations. So, and different essays I write, if I write an essay collection, there's not like a voice for the essay collection per se, but maybe certain essays need certain kinds, a different sort of voice. So it's really everything I write, I have to think, what is the voice of this piece? And so I think that makes art as well.
And you mention, you talk about that. You have a section about that in Acetylene Torch Songs, talking about the masks. And you talk about how these masks are not, as you speak of them, are not conciliatory, they're revelatory.
Right. And everything we write, as it's going to have a different voice, it's going to need to sort of have a different mask. Like the narrator is going to have to be portrayed differently from book to book. So again, the mask of the young wounded narrator in my first book, she's going to wear the mask of a young wounded narrator. In the mask in Love Song, which is to say, how does the narrator in Lovesick appear? It's going to have to be this tougher, edgier addict who yet is still struggling to recover. So the mask is going to sort of shift in Lovesick. At times, the narrator in Lovesick does wear the mask of, she's angry, she's pissed off, she's in rehab, she doesn't want to be there, and I'm so out of here. But except the narrator can't leave. So at times this narrator is going to wear the mask of this tough, angry addict, but then other times her vulnerability will sort of shine through, like, oh, I really do belong here, and I've got to get better. Otherwise, my life is just really a mess. So then the mask shifts to that of a more vulnerable persona. So everything we write, as much as it might need a different voice, will also, that voice has to be portrayed with a different mask.
I also love the section on hauntings. Can you talk about your definition of haunting and how we can and should explore what haunts us as writers?
Yeah, like what won't let go of you? There's so many things, and that's where we'll do our best writing. It's like what it can be. The essay I wrote for that is about this ring that I lost. It was given to me on my birthday. It was a diamond and gold ring, and I lost it. I was given it to it when I was maybe in 4th, 5th grade, something like that. And I lost it in college, and the ring has haunted me just forever because it sort of represents a gift that is representative of child sexual abuse. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but this to say the ring was very important, but I didn't really know why. So it just haunted me. So I had to write about this ring, and only when I wrote about it did I understand the true significance, both of the ring itself and how I felt about losing it. And so whatever haunts you, I mean, so it can be something small, seemingly small like that, like a thing that we lose or a thing that we get, or it can be something large, like, the whole time I spent acting out as a sex addict. I mean, all those years and all those men really haunted me. So the only way to really sort of get to the other side, to sort of let that haunting go, is to write about it. But what I came to understand, even writing the chapter about haunting in Acetylene Torch Song, is that initially I sort of thought that the things that haunt us are sort of out there, like let's say my father who molested me haunted me. But then I came to realize that, I mean, first of all, he's dead, but even if he weren't, I'm an adult now. He has no power over me. So what haunts me is really inside of myself. It's really like the illusion that, oh, he still had, like, say my father has all this power over me, or the loss of the ring. Well, the ring is gone, but it's really my feelings towards the ring that's inside of me. So what haunts us is really inside of us. So how do we get rid of these things that haunt us? We write it, because by writing it, we take it from inside of us. We put it out there on pieces of paper. And then, sure, I still think about it and everything, but the power that these things have are lessened once we write about them, once we sort of put them out on pieces of paper, which doesn't mean you have to publish it or anything. It's just the act of writing. Like this, whatever this event is really upsetting me, but I'll write about it, because once I make sense of it, then sort of that power it has over me lessens. It's out there now. It's not all inside of me.
Yeah. How did you come to writing? How did you get started? Have you always written since you were little?
I never wrote a word when I was little. I didn't even keep a journal or a diary. I was so lost growing up. I had no idea what was, my father says he loves me and he's hurting me. I had no language. I was this very lost little girl. I was a lost teenager. I was a lost young adult. I spent most of my life lost. And once I was, I was about maybe 30 years old. And I mean, this sounds sort of weird, but I just said, I think I'll write a novel one day. And
I
I
love
did.
that.
I mean, it was just like, yeah, you know what? I think I'll write a novel. And so, because back then, like nobody was talking about creative nonfiction, this was sort of before like the whole wave of memoirs started sort of in the mid 1990s. Before that, you wrote poetry or you wrote fiction. So I started writing a novel. It was terrible. And I've written about 5 really terrible, terrible novels. They're awful. I can't write fiction is the gist of it. And so, but once I started writing, I couldn't stop. And even though the novels were terrible, still they were sort of autobiographical. So it's not like, I don't consider that time wasted at all. I was learning how to write. It was some form of self-exploration, even though it was veiled in fiction. The reason why the novels are terrible is because of voice. I can't write fiction. I mean, it's sort of embarrassing. But when I try to write fiction, it's either completely boring or it's completely melodramatic. I can't like find a fictional voice. I've looked everywhere. I give up. So it's not under the bed. It's not hidden in the closet. There is no fictional voice in me. So it was really my therapist who said, Sue, why don't you write about yourself? And I said, I don't have anything to say. I mean, here I am in the middle of a nervous breakdown, struggling with sex addiction and eating disorder. I said, no, I don't have anything to say about myself. It's like, hello. But anyway, my therapist kept after me to write about myself. So finally I did. But as soon as I did, I would say within 5 minutes, I heard my voice. There it was. It was like, oh, I've been hiding behind the guise of fiction, sort of behind that veil of fiction, because as soon as I switched to nonfiction, man, I was ready to go. But again, I don't regret the time spent writing fiction, because I learned how to write, at least, that you need structure and stuff like that. And so my first book, actually, I wrote in 3 months, but everything else has taken much longer. But I think in some ways I had been trying. I wrote fiction for maybe 10 years. And basically, I was trying to write that first book, you could say, for 10 years, albeit fictionalized. So when I finally actually wrote the book as nonfiction, as memoir, it did fall out of me in about 3 months, but it's because of all of that, those 10 years writing.
And then what was the road to publication like for you?
So then I thought a friend of mine had won the AWP award. That's the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. And they have yearly contests in the 3 genres, fiction, poetry, and creative. So a friend of mine had won the award in fiction. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just send mine out to this award series. I totally knew I would not win it, because I thought they're never going to choose this book about growing up in this incestuous family as this literary prize. So I was a little nervous about publication. So I figured, but I'm a writer, I'll send it out. But I sort of knew it wasn't going to win. But I would have sent it out. So I would have felt okay about that. But then it won. And so lo and behold, you never know. And so, so the first book so when you win the AWP award, you get a cash prize and automatic publication with different presses. The different presses, the creative nonfiction one happens to be published by the University of Georgia Press. So that's how it was a fluke. But these awards,
I don't think it was a fluke.
Well, just a fluke in that a different year, different judge, it wouldn't have won. I mean, it's just, because that's what contests are. I mean, so I don't necessarily think everybody should just enter a contest, because you might win. I mean, somebody has to win, but so sort of like the lottery, somebody has to win. Sadly, I did not win the $5 gazillion lottery. But So yeah, somebody has to win. And so, I don't say don't try contests, because quite a few of my essays have won contests. And that is certainly a road to publication. Yeah, I mean, it's just, but it is sort of a crapshoot.
Well, so you won that one, and then what was it like going on from there?
So I was actually going to send Lovesick was my second book. I was actually going to send it to Georgia's University of Georgia Press, since they had published the first book. And I happened to be at this writers' conference. I met this fellow writer, and he asked me that same question, like, what are you going to do? I thought I'd send it to University of Georgia Press. He said, no, Sue, I think you should send it to my agent and have her sell it to New York, because you'll get more money. And I thought, oh, okay. So again, I thought it's not going to work. but he sent it to his agent. She took it on. And I said, so the only editor I want to work with is at Norton, and her name is Carol Houck-Smith, because it's sex addiction. I didn't want it sensationalized. I didn't know what, New York.
Yeah.
So, but Norton is, even though it's a big publishing company in New York, they are very literary. And this one editor, Carol Houck-Smith, who has since passed on, she was like the world's best. Everybody sort of knew her back in the day. And she was an amazing editor. Like, she actually edited, as opposed to just being an acquisitions editor. She was an editor. She took it. So, and it was published with Norton, and they did a very, respectful, tasteful job with it. So I'm really glad. But since then, so then actually my agent died, and Carol Houck-Smith also passed away. But then my next two books were essay collections. The Papoon Fan Club, My Life as a White Anglo-Saxon Jew, is my first essay collection. My second essay collection is How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences. So as essay collections, I felt that they would not be able to sort of hold their own in this big New York City publishing world. Their essay collections are sort of quieter, and I just, even though I had a great experience with Norton, I think my heart is more with university presses, or my soul, my sensibility, whatever you want to call it. And at the same time, the University of Nebraska Press was starting this American Lives series. And I got at the AWP convention that's held every year, I went by their booth and I talked to the editors there, and they were like so incredibly friendly. And I told them about the first essay collection. They said, yes, send it to us. So I did, and they published it. And they've published, then they published How to Survive Death. And then they also published Acetylene Torch Songs. So I just feel I really love the University of Nebraska Press. I feel very comfortable there. They're very interested in creative nonfiction. That's one of their if to write fiction, they publish fiction if it's set sort of in Nebraska or the Midwest. But for creative nonfiction, they're open to everything and anything experimental, just whatever. So it's great. It's a great press for creative nonfiction.
Oh, that's great to know. What's your writing routine like?
Well, I used to have one. The irony, and it is a complete irony, the more you get published, the less time you have to write, because you're also marketing and trying to sell your books and all of that. Also, I teach at the low residency MFA program at Vermont College of Fine Arts, as you know. And I was just elected co-chair of our writing program.
Yay!
Which I love. I totally love, but I've not written a word since I was elected. I'm spending, like, I don't know, hours every day on our program, which again, I'm not complaining at all. It's just, it's the reality that I haven't had time to write since I was elected co-chair. But I'm not complaining because I love Vermont College of Fine Arts. I love our writing program. I love my colleagues. I love our students. I love the whole thing, everything about it. And being co-chair is a real honor for me. And I don't mean that like in a sappy way, but I really love BCFA. I do.
Mhm.
And so, so yes, I have no writing routine now at all. If I had a writing routine
I was about to say, what did it look like?
back in the day, I would really start writing first thing in the morning, like before I would check email, because once you check email, that's the day.
Yeah.
And so, or once you go on to your social media, that's the day. I mean, you're just like going down a rabbit hole. So yeah, so first thing in the morning, I would just write. In fact, I write on a laptop. The laptop would be right next to my bed. I would not even, I mean, basically hardly get out of bed. I just lifted the laptop up, plop it on my stomach and write. When the world hasn't intruded too much, that's when
Mhm.
I do my best writing, is when I can just get immediately into that space of whatever it is I'm writing on. I'm just gonna get right back in there. So I would write for, maybe 4 or 5 hours. That's my ideal writing routine. And I did get a lot of writing done during the serious part of the lockdown and COVID, because, well, I wasn't going anywhere. And, but also it was a way to, well, I stopped watching the news in 2016. We won't even go into the reasons. One can probably figure that out. I could no longer watch the news without just hyperventilating. So it's sanity. So I stopped watching news then, and then during COVID, again, like I sort of know headlines. I know, like, okay, Sue, no, it's not safe to go, in a crowd of people. So buy your mask and all that. So I know basically what's going on, but I really, getting through COVID on top of having somebody who I didn't like as president, it was my sanity. It was centering to me. It kept me calm. It kept me
Yeah.
sane. It was all of that. So I've actually did rather recently just about finish another essay collection, flash essays. And I was sort of writing it at the same time I was writing Acetylene Torch Songs. I sort of was going back and forth a little bit between the two. One would sort of rest for a while, and then I kind of, so so now that Acetylene is out in the world and everything, I'm going to finish up this essay collection.
When you sit down to start something new, do you have sort of any idea of where you're going, or are you really just sitting down and seeing what comes?
I pretty much want to not know where I'm going,
Mm.
because I want to let the words tell me where they want to go and where does
Mhm.
the energy want to lead me. Now, in the first two books, the first one about growing up in the incestuous family, I knew what that was going to be about.
Mhm.
And with Lovesick, I knew what the theme was. I didn't know where they were really going to take me at the end, like where they might end or what I might learn. I had no idea, but I did have the theme. With the two essay collections, I didn't even know I was writing an essay collection. I was just like, I'd written these two memoirs. Okay, I've got to write something. So I started sort of writing, what I thought were standalone essays. About a couple of years in, I thought, with the first books of the Pat Boone fan club, My Life as a White Anglo-Saxon Jew, it's not all about Pat Boone, that's embarrassing enough even to have his name in the title. And by the way, I don't agree with him. He's with him politically. He's pretty far out there. But growing up, I did want him to adopt me and be my father, because he was the antithesis of my own real father. So it's
Mm.
basically that it became this sort of about my misguided search for spirituality. But
Mhm.
I didn't know that when I started. I really thought I was writing these standalone essays. but about, halfway in or so, I thought, these really are sort of about this misguided search for spirituality. And so when I sort of had that recollection, then I sort of revised the essays. I published several of them, but I revised them to better fit the theme of the book. And sometimes it was just changing a title, sometimes it was changing an ending, sometimes it was changing kind of the metaphors of it. And so there was sort of an overhaul so that it would be, the essay collection would be sort of cohesive around this theme. And the same thing is true with How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences. I thought I was just sort of writing these standalone essays. And then partway through, I thought, they're all about sort of different. So I am terrified of dying, just FYI. So it's partly about my fear of death, but also then once I realized it was sort of around the idea of death, it was also, well, I should explore the origins of this fear of death. And then it sort of branched out a little bit more to be, this How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences. What are these other inconveniences? So there's sort of more forms of like spiritual or emotional death, like say addiction or divorce, any kind of loss. So it's sort of broadly speaking around, how to survive all these different forms of death. And of course, in terms of physical death, a lot of irony there, of course, because I don't think I'll escape it, which pisses me off. But it's sort of like, well, except that in the book, I did come to realize, which I would not have known, of course, except that I'd written the book, that there is a way to sort of survive death, and that is through your words, through writing, that your words may live on. So it's, and again, I didn't know that till I'd had like 6 drafts of the book, like, oh, wait, but I really am writing about how to survive death, so that even though I physically won't, my words will always be there.
I love that. That's great. What do you know now that you wish you had known before you published that first memoir?
Nothing. Because it would almost be too scary. I mean, it's really, I would rather not know. I would rather just live. And look, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm really sort of, I would like to be one, because I think that's, staying in the moment thing that's like so cool, right? I really don't know how to stay in the moment very well, but really that's the way to, but really, if you do know what's going to come, it sort of does take away the mystery of life. And, like, the mystery of life is what is so intriguing, whether you're writing about it or just living it or whatever. And so if I had known, then that's sort of a bummer, because I wouldn't get to experience the joy and the heartache of it all, because writing, being an artist, is joyful. It's devastating. It's good news. It's bad news. It's acceptance. It's rejection. It's pain, and it's joy. It's all of it. And you'd be almost overwhelmed to know beforehand. So honestly, I can't think of anything. Nothing.
What a beautiful answer. All right. Traditional last question here has to do with music. So if you could pick a theme song for Acetylene Torch Songs, what would the theme song be?
I'm Still Standing by Elton John, I think.
Nice. Good one.
Because that is sort of living and writing your life, is that you've got, let's say if you're writing about your life, it means you have to have faith in that life. You have to believe that this life is worth writing about, whatever it is. And you have to still be standing. I know I'm going to think of a better song as soon as we end this call, but that's the first thing that comes to mind, is that we do have to sort of still be standing. Because what does that mean? It does mean that we've all gotten hard knocks. Nobody gets through life easy, but we are still believe enough to go on, just say in a physical sense and in a life, like I'm going to get up tomorrow and stuff, but also for our purposes here, to write, that I'm going to get up tomorrow and write if I'm not answering 20 emails, but theoretically I'm going to get up tomorrow to write. And just the idea of still standing, I think, is a very hopeful message.
Yeah.
That I am still standing. My life is still worth living. My life is worth writing about, and I'm going to figure it out. And I can only keep writing one word after another word after another word if I am still standing.
Great. Sue William Silverman, thank you so much for coming on. It has been such a joy to get to talk to you.
Oh, well, Kelley, Vic, it's such a joy to talk to you. Thank you. I mean, those are great questions, really great questions, very insightful. And I'm so appreciative of your interest. And so thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.